Earlier today, a group of 8 Republican senators, including Rob Portman and Lindsey Graham, sent a letter to President Trump urging him to pursue a tough policy on Russia. The letter read in part, "We must never pursue cooperation with Russia at the expense of our fundamental interests of defending our allies and promoting our values. The United States should unequivocally condemn and take proactive steps to stem the continued Russian aggression in Ukraine." For more, I want to bring in one of those senators, Republican Senator Rob Portman of Ohio. Senator, nice to see you. Thanks for being with us.
Kate, thanks for having me on. You bet.
Let's talk about that letter. After you sent that letter, we also got a report from Reuters a short time ago about the phone call between President Trump and Vladimir Putin the other day. President Trump, according to that report, denounced the New START nuclear arms treaty, which was negotiated under President Obama, saying that it was a bad deal for the U.S. The White House press secretary, Sean Spicer, would not confirm whether that happened during that conversation, but I wonder your take on that, if the president did indeed say he thinks that was a bad deal.
You know, I don't know what he said, and we'd have to rely on the White House to tell us that. But I do think actually the New START agreement had some disadvantages for us relative to Russia. They're stronger on the tactical weapons, we on the strategic ones, and the strategic ones were the ones that were more limited. But there's a broader issue here, Kate, and that is us standing up in the case of Ukraine for an important ally, in the case of Syria to ensure that the Russian presence there is not harming our objectives and our national security. And I think the best way to ensure we have a good relationship with Russia is to stand up and be counted. And I think we didn't do that enough in the Obama years, and I want to be sure that we don't continue that in the Trump administration. And some of the signals from the administration, as you know, for instance, about relieving sanctions, I think make no sense.
Well, I was going to ask you about that specifically, because there have been signals that perhaps they would do away with some of the sanctions, and perhaps those that are tied to the actions in Ukraine. You very much don't want that to happen.
Well, what they had floated was the possibility of relieving sanctions for agreements in other areas. In other words, not dealing with the underlying causes of the sanctions, including taking Crimea, which, of course, first time since World War II, a country in Europe was invaded. And if anything, I think we didn't stand up to that with our NATO allies in an aggressive enough way. And for us to relieve the sanctions without dealing with that issue, and without dealing with what's going on the eastern border of Ukraine as we talk, which is more violence, the Russians supporting the separatists there, causing more problems for our ally Ukraine. So I think we've got to be very careful. If we were to do that, I think it would send a very dangerous signal to our allies who are wondering, are we going to be there with them? But also to our adversaries, that we put sanctions in place but then are willing to relieve them for other reasons that may not be ones that eventually pan out. In other words, saying that we'll agree to relieve sanctions for some future commitment that Russia may or may not keep.
Let me ask you about Judge Neil Gorsuch, because you're up there on Capitol Hill. I know you haven't had your individual meeting with him just yet, but you will. As you know, this afternoon, lots of talk about what your colleague, Senator Richard Blumenthal, reported this morning, saying that the judge in his meeting said that the comments from the president about the judge out in San Francisco regarding the immigration ban, Judge Gorsuch called it disheartening and demoralizing. I guess I'd like your take on that. You haven't met with him yet, but can you understand where he's coming from if indeed he made those comments?
I can, and I have met with him, not officially in my office, but I've had the chance to talk to him. And, I do think that he is an extraordinary pick because he is so highly respected, probably the most respected of the people on that longer list that President Trump had. And I think with regard to those comments, he is asserting the independence of the judiciary as the founders intended. And I think it's another good reason for us to consider him as a Supreme Court justice, because you want someone.
The president taking on it's a Democratic Senator, Richard Blumenthal, but the president with some really sharp words for him last hour.
Well, I don't know the background to that, but I assume it's because he revealed comments that were made in a
He's saying that he
mischaracterized.
He's accusing Blumenthal of mischaracterizing the conversation that the senator, had with Judge Gorsuch.
Yeah, I don't know that, but let's assume for a moment that Judge Gorsuch did say something similar to that. I don't think that's a surprise. I mean, this is a guy who has spent a career defending the independence of the judiciary, understanding that he is a judge, by the way, who's meant to interpret the law, not make the law, which is exactly what President Trump and Republicans have been talking about, as a justice who He's going to be smart, qualified in the Scalia style, someone who will look at every case as it comes along on its own merits, based on what the law and the Constitution tells them. So I think it would not be inconsistent for him to have said something like that.
I'd like to ask you about Obamacare while I have you, Senator. There was some talk the other day. Senator Bernie Sanders talked about lifetime limits on coverage. He, a Democrat, obviously believes, or independent who votes with the Democrats, he believes that that's going to have to be a part of your cost-cutting measures, of the Republican plan to replace Obamacare, that there will have to include a lifetime limit. Is it your understanding that that will be included in any replacement plan?
No, we're not there yet, of course, but I don't think that's something that's being considered. What I do think is being considered is to take people who are currently covered under the exchanges and those in expanded Medicaid states and ensure that they can continue to have the coverage that they need, but to do it in a more affordable way. And in the case of Medicaid, to provide the states a lot more flexibility to be able to put together a better Medicaid plan. In my state of Ohio, as you may know, we've tried that. We had our waiver request denied, but Governor Kasich would very much like to have that flexibility. So I think there are ways to take some of the existing parts of the Affordable Care Act, like being sure people with pre-existing conditions can still get coverage, and then take the broader parts, which is all the mandates, all the new taxes, and these exchanges, which really haven't worked as they were promised, and be able to fold people into a better system. That's the idea.
Before I let you go, I want to ask you about your work on human trafficking. I know it's something that you care a lot about and have dedicated a lot of time to. There's a new documentary that you're featured in coming out tomorrow in limited release. It's called I Am Jane Doe. It talks a lot about a website that, frankly, I had not heard of, Senator, called Backpage. Maybe everybody else has, but talk about what it is that you discovered about Backpage and why you think it's important to focus on this. And if I could ask, do you think the new Attorney General, your former colleague Jeff Sessions, will be as focused on human trafficking as you have been?
First, it's an incredibly important issue. Unfortunately, human trafficking, and specifically sex trafficking of minors, is something that has grown over the last several years. And one reason is the internet. As survivors have told me, you know, Senator, we've moved from the street corner to the internet, and specifically to the iPhone. And Backpage.com has about 80% of the commercial sex traffic, and so they have almost a monopoly on this. And we know that girls underage have been sold on this website, and so we've spent 2 years investigating them. And part of what this documentary is about, which is coming out tomorrow at 6 theaters around the country, and I encourage people to see it or go online and look at the trailer, I Am Jane Doe. It's a very powerful indictment of what Backpage has been doing. And also about our investigation and the hope we can make some changes in law to be able to stop this selling of girls online. In terms of Jeff Sessions, yes, I do think he's very concerned about it. I did talk to him about it yesterday, by the way, right after he was confirmed, my first conversation with him. And he certainly is someone who has a passion about trying to stop the trafficking. And we look forward to making this a totally nonpartisan, not just bipartisan, but nonpartisan issue, and continuing to make progress.
Yeah, I know there were Democrats and Republicans at the screening, I think in Washington the other night. Senator, thank you.
Can I mention one other thing?
Sure.
So much of the trafficking in Ohio and around the country is related to heroin use. In other words, these girls and women are becoming dependent on their traffickers because their traffickers have made them addicted to heroin and other drugs like crystal meth. And the work you did with your series, your documentaries on heroin, are incredibly powerful. And I know you're going to keep that up, but this will save lives because it is, because of overdose deaths, really the top issue in our country now in terms of #1 cause of deaths, surpassing car accidents. But it also is related to this issue of trafficking. And so thank you for your work on that.
Oh, I appreciate that, Senator. And I agree wholeheartedly that this is something we have to talk about as a nation, all politics aside. Senator Rob Portman from Ohio, thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Kate. Take care.
Up next.